equipped replacement, the C6F, the next year. By 1929, Citroën had become by far France's largest car maker, with 25% higher production than Renault, his closest competitor. And as the 1930s began, Citroën devoted progressively more time and money to technological innovation, much to the concern of the financiers who were funding it. André Citroën's belief in the sales power of advanced design was expressed in his motto, "As soon as an idea is good, the money is of no importance." It was a slogan guaranteed to unnerve money men, but it perfectly described Citroën's new car line of 1932, a good idea, costly to produce. The 8CV, 10CV, and 15CV collectively carried the nickname Rosalie. They incorporated another new construction idea from the American Budd Company, a unitary frame built without a chassis as foundation. Citroën proved the strength of the unibody construction to a doubtful French public by pushing a Rosalie off a cliff. Rolling one down a hill, and filling a bus with 22 passengers, then setting it on top of the car's roof. The Rosalies also featured an innovation first offered on the C4 and the C6G, rubberized engine mountings designed to reduce noise and vibration. The image of a gliding swan was adopted as the mascot for the technology, called moteur flottant, floating power. An 8CV with a special streamlined body beat the world's distance record by traveling the equivalent of 7 laps around the globe. Its nickname was Petite Rosalie.
On the 15th of March 1933, André Citroën launched his Rosalie 4 operation. The little Rosalie covered 300,000 kilometers on the Montlhéry speed ring at an average speed of more than 93 kilometers per hour, beating 106 world records and 191 international records.
Up to this point, André Citroën had taken a series of calculated risks to advance automotive technology and expand his company. He borrowed money to present each new line, and he'd been able to pay it back only when each line succeeded. In 1934, only 2 years after Rosalie's introduction, Citroën decided essentially to replace it by blending all the technologies he'd pioneered and popularized with a few even more radical ideas.
He had borrowed some ideas from America, from Henry Ford in terms of production quantities and simplicity, but he also had some very advanced ideas of his own, and his idea was to present in a single car a revolutionary step to the future. And he put all his money on the line and did just that.
André Citroën's revolutionary step was the introduction of a technology practically unknown at the time, front-wheel drive. Up to this point, virtually all cars were pushed along by the rear wheels. Though front-wheel drive offered considerable advantages of traction and stability, the technical obstacles had kept all but a very few car makers from attempting it. And of these, only the American Ford Company made more than a few hundred front-drive cars. Even so, Fords like this L29 suffered serious reliability problems, their constant velocity joints failing prematurely due to inadequate lubrication. It was not until 1966 that the Oldsmobile Toronado became the first front-wheel drive car to achieve success in the American marketplace. But in 1933, at least a quarter century ahead of his time, André Citroën wanted a car of completely new design, with no components carried over from earlier vehicles. A costly move that earned the antipathy of his head of design, Maurice Broglie. A talented young engineer named André Lefebvre was instead recruited to head up the project. Lefebvre came to Citroën from Renault, having started out in aviation, a background that would come into play as the car developed. Adding to the project's sizable cost was the necessary demolition and rebuilding of the Quai de Javel factory in just 6 months. The new car was introduced in 1934, descriptively named the traction avant, or front drive. The entire development of the Traction 7A had taken just over a year.
When it came out, it combined a number of features, any one of which would have been enough to identify it. Front-wheel drive, of course, torsion bar suspension, 4 independent wheels, 4-wheel hydraulic brakes, an engine with removable linings and push-rod-operated valves, and no running board.
The Traction was the first road car to include a torsion bar suspension, under license from the German auto engineer Ferdinand Porsche. The power-assisted brakes were likewise advanced and likewise licensed from the Lockheed Aircraft Company. None of these features were absolutely new in a production automobile, but it was the first time that they'd been offered together in a single car. Like the Rosalie, the Traction used welded unibody construction, the strength of which Citroën promoted by once again pushing the car off a cliff, and this time driving it away. The styling of the Traction, offered in both sedan and convertible versions, certainly was a giant step forward. Front drive and the absence of a drive shaft permitted designer Flaminio Bertoni to set the Traction quite low to the ground. The aeronautic orientation of Project Chief Lefebvre was evident in the unprecedented attention given to the car's aerodynamics. The Traction's sleek lines and distinctively sloping radiator grille made it look as if it were moving, even when it was standing still. However, because of the Traction Avant's radically shortened development cycle, not everything about the car worked perfectly. The constant velocity joints suffered the same sort of reliability problems that had plagued the Cord. They were replaced by more primitive but dependable universal joints mounted back to back. André Citroën had originally planned to include a kind of automatic transmission in the Traction. When the automatic proved unreliable, it was scrapped and replaced by a manual transmission. It was designed on a kitchen table in just 2 weeks.
He just seemed to be able to pick and choose of advanced features and then amazingly meld them into a package, because if his suspension had been wrong, if his transmission had been wrong, if his engine had been wrong, the car would have been wrong.
The Traction Avant was not wrong. Many in the press and public regarded it as sensational, an engineering masterpiece. This was the car on which André Citroën had bet his company, but it was a bet he was destined to lose. André Citroën had staked everything on the Traction Avant. When it was introduced in 1934, the Traction was the most technologically advanced production car in the world. Sadly, this wasn't enough to save the fortunes of André Citroën and his motor company. The expense of developing the Traction and rebuilding the Quai de Javel factory, along with André Citroën's growing casino debts and the global economic crash of the 1930s, combined to push the company to the brink of bankruptcy. The French government asked Citroën's principal creditor, Michelin Tires, to take control of the company. The price was the layoff of 8,000 workers and the removal of André Citroën as president of the firm bearing his name. In 1935, a claim for his Traction Avant was still ringing in the press, but the Depression had driven sales to their lowest ebb. And André Citroën died of cancer at the age of 57.
Just at the time when the Traction Avant was being recognized as the car that he predicted it would be, unfortunately his gambling caught up with him and he was out of the company and subsequently died, I guess always with a broken heart in a situation like this. But he didn't get really to see the fruits of his entrepreneurial genius, and those fruits went on to the present day.
The company struggled on under new leadership, fine-tuning the Traction Avant line, introducing new variations. Early versions of the Traction were considered somewhat underpowered, a shortcoming the company soon remedied, by introducing the famed 15.6, 15 CV and 6 cylinders. Within a few years of André Citroën's death, sales began to climb. Soon, the Traction Avant was the most popular production car of the day. But the new management was also looking forward to the company's next gamble. The idea came from the new managing director brought in by Michelin, a man named Pierre-Jules Boulanger. He wanted to motorize the whole country, especially the untapped rural market, potential customers who still relied on horse-drawn carts and carriages. Boulanger ordered Citroën engineers to design what he called an umbrella on 4 wheels.
It was a small car, very austere in appearance, very low-powered, geared well enough so that it could run well enough on the roads, and with room for 2 people and a load of potatoes, which is sort of an unusual demographic characteristic to look for.
The top-secret project received the code name TPV, or Très Petite Voiture, very small car. As with the Traction, André Lefebvre headed the project after it had been refused by the chief designer Maurice Broglie. The 1937 prototype TPV had a front end that was corrugated to improve the strength of the light-gauge aluminium, and only 1 headlamp, the legal minimum. The 2-cylinder engine could barely get the car up to 40 miles an hour, but it was extremely economical, more than 60 miles to the gallon. There were no frills. Even the windscreen wiper was manually operated. Boulanger also wanted the front-drive TPV to handle comfortably on rough country back roads, and included the specification that a basket of eggs set on the back seat should survive having the car driven across a plowed field with all the eggs unbroken. This the engineers accomplished by including a 4-wheel independent suspension, along with rack and pinion steering and power-assisted brakes. The car was finally ready for production in 1939, and 250 demonstration copies rolled off the line on September the 3rd. The next day, Hitler invaded Poland, and France was at war. World War II and the German occupation of France in 1940 gradually ground Citroën production to a halt. Company managers refused to collaborate with the Nazi conquerors, and by 1943, Citroën factories had been shut down completely. To prevent the TPV from falling into German hands, Pierre Boulanger ordered